Welcome to the Deconstructing Data podcast. I'm Jessie Lezak, CMO at BDEX, along with co-host David
Finkelstein, CEO of BDEX.
Yes.
Great to be here again with you, Jessie.
Yeah, you too. Co-founder and CEO. I know we're jumping on top of each other, but how's it going, David? What's new?
All good. Just busy week as usual, and I guess it makes it a little busier since this is our second podcast this week.
Yeah, that's true.
We interviewed Gina from ChatGPT earlier this week, and so looking to get into the next one with our new guest we have today.
Yeah, and a guest co-host, so we'll get into that too. But yeah, Gina was a lot of fun, and I'm sure maybe she'll make an appearance here again, since I don't think ChatGPT is going anywhere.
Nope.
But anyway, so everybody probably remembers, if you started listening to Deconstructing Data early on, Josh Morgan, our guest co-host today. Welcome back, Josh Morgan. How's it going?
Fantastic. So happy to be here. Appreciate you too.
Update us. What's new with you?
Being busy in the land of customer marketing over at Drift, working on an ebook, and I am trying to my pivot into a new industry was I was so busy, and I am trying to get myself into learning SQL and some Python and some things like that. But I have also had to remind myself that I need to enjoy life a little bit and to rest. So just kind of juggling the enjoying my time, not being so crazy busy, and also trying to feel like I'm not being unproductive with my free time.
Fantastic. Well, it's great to see you again. But I'll go ahead and bring in our guest. We have Adem Manderovic. Thank you so much for being here. He is the founder and CEO of Disruptur.co. And oh my gosh, there's just so much I could say. So Disruptur.co, it brings sales, marketing, and it puts customer success together so customers don't have to. And I'm sure everybody's seen hashtag closed circuit selling on LinkedIn because it's all over the place. And it is a one motion to create and capture demand and remove abrasion from the client acquisition pre and post sale. So utilizing this framework, this week's guest built ecosystems for done-for-you clients, removing the requirement for marketing, new business, and key account management. So this is all really great. Welcome, and thank you for joining us from your backyard in Australia. It's great to have you here, Adem.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, guys. I appreciate that. And this is not a fake background, by the way.
Yeah, it's really beautiful.
Yeah, that's great. It's awesome to have you here, Adem. Let's kick off the show and tell us your story. What led you to Disruptur.co, and tell us a little bit about the problems that you're helping to solve.
Yeah. So basically what I learned in a high level is being head of sales in multiple places previously, mostly in the banking and insurance sectors, was that all of our bid contracts were actually getting rejected most of the time. So I was like, well, then I started to think to myself from a customer lens, who actually reads those 27 pages about the company that you're wanting to maybe need a solution from? And the answer to that I came to was nobody. So what I thought to do, which was a little bit maybe controversial, was to find some of those bid contracts and actually cut them down into two pages of sales copy. And then I cut that down again to make it more palatable with what I would like to read. And then I made that into educational content into a cartoon. And then I basically made a different delivery system of getting my new business team to ask for permission to send them to key clients to view. And once they did, they actually were so blown away that 8 out of every 10 actually went back to contract. So through that process, obviously I just kept repeating that in multiple industries. And I was like, why does this keep working so efficiently? But that's where I learned that the marketing that were hamstrung of what they were allowed to do at the time weren't actually hitting the mark of what the customer needed to see and where they needed to see it. So we built that out as a means to an end, but obviously I had to ask for forgiveness, not permission, each time that I did that. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Sorry, I think the sun just moved.
No worries. There we go.
See, it's definitely real, live in the backyard.
Nice. Yes. As soon as the show started, of course, there's a little bit of a glare.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks for sharing. And I think this is going to be a really great discussion. So we might as well just get right into it. So considering your experience and, what you know, let's get into the first topic on targeting. And I know this was something you wanted to talk about. And of course, our listeners love to hear about data. So let's just dive in high level there with data and targeting. We'll go ahead and let you kick us off.
Yeah, so obviously being able to find what I've found, so I'm just making sure I don't get too much glare. So being able to find that, hang on, let me rewind. What I found was that marketing were hamstrung to only doing lead gen task or no intent lead gen, and they weren't actually being able to work on demand from being able to create the right educational content to intersect people's buying cycles. So what I was able to do is look at what should we be making to where do they need to see it, what do they need to see, and what's going to take them to the dream state from the data that we knew. So what I found through that process, and every time that I was head of sales, is that marketing didn't hit that mark, but it wasn't actually their fault. So I'm actually a marketer with a head of sales background. So through running different types of targeting, so we would look at why would they be in market, who are they with right now, why are they past the tipping point of no return, so they should be in market for these products, and what's going to make it real for them. That's basically in a nutshell what we focus on mostly to make that happen, and then we just use different ways to get permission to ask them to see what they need to see, if that makes sense. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
yeah, no, I think it definitely gives us an opportunity to dive a little deeper. And so in there, you're talking about a lot of intent data, right? About identifying certain customer intents, about where they are in the buying cycle, and so far. Talk to our listeners a little bit about where does that data come from? Like, how do you find this out?
Okay.
I mean, that's like the gold mine, right? That's what everybody wants to know. How do I find out just when someone's ready to buy my product?
So yeah, that's a good question. So I have a team that does that for me, obviously. Now we would obviously just do a data scrape of what I think the target should be, and then what triggers they should be. So whether they are, what their company financials are, is their job growth in their department size? Have they gone up or down in that sector? Who were they with previously? What factors do we know? Can we also run disc profiling on what those personas are, and then against our best win and loss to then make the personas what would be the best fit for us, so that we're not wasting our time. So I started talking about that as in what I call top-down targeting, because if we don't get all of those factors right, when we make that, we're just wasting our time. So with those known factors, that should put you well placed to be able to only be focusing on the ones that should be in market. But what we're doing different is, I know that we talked a little bit offline, is I'm also trying to find triggers of the B2C data of who are those personas, what do they do, what do they like, but where do they, the best part of this is what I'm talking about in commercial access gates, is where do multiples of those personas also exist, because they have to either one, work somewhere, two, hang out somewhere, or three, they're in an association somewhere, right? So if you're selling into a CTO, a CFO, or a HR manager for an employee benefit, they are also highly prevalent from B2C data somewhere else and with all these known factors. So instead of selling to one company to get 50 seats, we are selling to maybe one person for access to 50 of those management job titles to get 50 of 50 seats, if that makes sense. So that's probably where we take it a little bit further. I thought it was, as I've said multiple times, and people spear me for this, I thought it was pretty obvious to try to work out where multiples of those personas would exist by running B2C data that way while you're running B2B data that way, and then putting them together. Instead of having to hard sell from A to B, you then have the opportunity to sell to multiples of multiples, whether that's in communities, whether that's in multiple associations, whether they're in other places. We can find that through running it in both directions. And then you only really need permission to sell to multiples of multiples all of the time. So if you're doing it that way, I also coined that is also a non-abrasive selling technique, because with all of those known factors, they should be in market for what you need to solve their problem to get them to the dream state. And most chances there'll be multiples of those people within those groups of people where that exists, where you've got more chances to do multiplications, which I basically coined growth by magnification. Sorry, the sun just moved again. I'll move it closer. Sorry, the sun just keeps moving. It's morning here in sunny Australia. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think it makes sense. I think that there's a lot of intricacies there to that, and there's a lot of deep diving into data that I think that when you say it seems obvious, I think the problem there for most people is, seems like a lot of wheels to spin, a lot of gears to spin in order to get to all that information and compile it all together. And so, I think that, it sounds to me like the value that you're really bringing to the table is sort of the having built the operations around being able to do all that digging and churn all that information to make great use of it. Right.
Yeah. Well, maybe I could simplify like this, if I may. If your company had the opportunity to not sell from A to B, just hard selling for one opportunity, would you not try to sell multiples of that opportunity if you could? So where do those multiples of that opportunity exist? If you can find the data that has the answer to that problem, you're going to be able to serve yourself better, so you don't need to hard sell A to B. So that's basically what we do.
Right. So it's a one-to-many relationship is what you're saying. Yeah.
So if you're doing that in B2B, you just need to shift where the gate is. If you're doing that in B2C, you just need to shift where the gate is for those accesses. But it's really as simple as that. And I know that people have absolutely attacked me on LinkedIn when I've said that before, because I've come out and said it actually doesn't matter if it's B2B or B2C if you move where the access gate is, because multiples of those people work, associate, or congregate somewhere. So it's really as simple as that.
It's very interesting. So in terms of targeting, that's all great. Does anybody have any other topics before we move into the next one, which is triggers? And we all know data is really important with triggers, because we don't want to trigger anything to the wrong person.
Well, I do. So has your approach been any different going to the B2C personas versus the B2B? Because I think we often see, if we even just look at advertising and marketing, it's very often a different approach from B2B versus B2C, where B2B tends to be more, I don't want to say standoffish, but very kind of buttoned up, very professional. But as we go into B2C, it gets a little bit more personable, because you're dealing more with consumers and people. Has your approach changed at all when you're dealing with B2B versus B2C?
Great question. I think if I was bold enough to call the company Disruptor, I've got this covered. So in short, no, because you only need to get permission for access of those multiples from somewhere. So once you've got that, how you're getting to those multiples of multiples is basically the same. You just need to change where the access for that exists. So for example, when I did the FMCG company that only sold direct to consumer, all I needed to do is work out where the multiples of those consumers have that problem, and then ask for access to sell into those groups of multiplication. So that is exactly the same as if I was doing that in a B2B situation. I just need to shift. Instead of selling into where multiples of those B2C people are, I sell into multiples of where the B2B personas are in one place. But the access, the request, the educational content, and the targeting of that is exactly the same. Does that answer your question? I know that it sounds ridiculous for me to say that it's exactly the same. However, I can assure you, through 13 industry sectors of doing it, I think that I have some substantiation.
Well, and I don't think it's necessarily like ridiculous, because there are a number of people like Todd Closer and other people that, and I probably butchered his last name, that take that approach, what would have been, and I use kind of like Old Navy as kind of an example, who basically gave all of their like outreach to the consumer specifically to create kind of a lot of personality to it, and bringing it into the B2B. And then some people are very, they're like, no, this is not how we do it. But I think that we've seen that we have to kind of evolve with the times.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, it's 4:30 and I have to be mindful of the clock because I'm always the one that has to cut us off. So I'm going to move us along onto triggers. So again, we'll let you kick us off here, Adam. What would you say to our audience in terms of data, triggers, and what you're doing with B2C data, and I guess, of course, B2B data as well?
Yeah. So I know that a lot of people now would be pretty across looking for job postings for certain types of triggers or what's the company most talked about, and you'd be able to run that in a spreadsheet and dump that data out and then pivot table that to find out what's valuable to companies from just the job posts. But when I was manually doing that, maybe 10 years ago, I don't know that any other people were doing that at that point in time. So that's an absolute gold mine, because you can find one, company most talked about, company values, and you can also find if they're advertising for certain roles within those departments, they're obviously in growth mode, and then you can cross-reference that somewhere else to validate if that's the case, or if they're just doing a headcount replacement. So that's the number one thing for me that I found through all of these years. So now probably 11 years of doing that. That's the number one thing that I would be looking for. Other things you could obviously scrape if you're good enough through certain types of back ending and to find out in things that are mentioned on public in the company financials to see what they're trying to achieve. There's obviously, with the advances of what we can do now in the data, those types of things. And then on like the LinkedIn side, there'll be obviously triggers. Yeah. Oh, sorry, Josh. I was just reading your question. Sorry. Yeah. So that. So where was I? That was. Those are the two main triggers that I would be looking for. So what's the company most talked about? What are the growth, if they're in growth mode? What other things can we glean from the job posts, which I manually was doing many years ago, but now obviously I've got a team that can do that. What other triggers do exist? Are they downsizing? Do they have pressure to downsize? Are they now trying to do more with less? Would they be now open to the discussion because they're openly discussing wanting to do more with less? So if I slide in and say, well, actually, you've got 3 people in your marketing team, you've got 3 people in your new business team, and 3 people in your customer success. If I could do that for 1/5 of the price of all of those, would you like to have a conversation? So that's also an obvious trigger. But yeah, so with additional triggers to that, I'd be looking for our company best win-loss against looking at their existing client databases, then cross-referencing that as well. But yeah, I'd try to work out if that answers your question on triggers.
I think so. Very interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, anything?
Yeah, it's interesting. What we've noticed in the past, and sometimes there are economic triggers, right? That triggers that happen, or even political, just triggers that happen that are more environmental than just specific to a specific type of company, right? And so we saw, for example, COVID was a trigger in the sense that it left sort of this gap in companies not knowing what the future meant, and so there was sort of this. We found in the advertising industry that there was an immediate focus on, okay, we need to be more efficient, and that caused people to concentrate more on their return on ad spend and actually improving performance and things like that. And so I think also that there's sort of these environmental triggers that can create opportunity for certain types of companies, and that's one example in our industry that we found in the past as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you want to make sure you have quality data with triggers. I think of text messaging when I think of triggers, just because it's an automation. I've set up before. So you want to make sure that you have the best data, you have everyone's opt-in consent. But yeah, it can get messy if you have really bad data. So, having a partner like BDEX to help make sure that you're working, with fraud-free data and, you're talking to actual people, because then that saves you money too. Just think of like different triggers that include direct mail. Well, that's a stamp every time you're sending it. So if you have bad data, then you're going to be sending mail to the wrong person. But yeah, that's immediately what comes to mind for me when I think of triggers is bad data and just wasteful money, wasted money.
Mhm.
So I have a question on this. It's a little bit not necessarily related to triggers, because I noticed that you mentioned, like, hey, you've got these 3 people here, these 3 people here, these 3 people here, and you are talking about your sales all the way to your customer success.
Yep.
And so I know, like, a big pain point of companies right now is customer retention. So it sounds like you are coming more from like a full cycle. And does your company, like, how do you account for, like, hitting that retention of the customers if you are pulling the entire thing together from the sales to the customer success team?
So from what perspective do you mean? Do you mean from sorry, can you reframe that?
Yeah. So if we're coming in, because it sounds like you're coming in for almost like a full cycle, because you're coming in from sales all the way to the customer success team, which typically they are handling like retention of the customers, which is absolutely important. So does your company play a part in the retention of customers also?
Yeah, big time. So one of the reason, okay, I'm glad that you reframed it that way. The reason that I did it that way is because one of the biggest things that I've noticed, obviously being head of sales many times before, and then also realizing the misalignment and misunderstanding of job function between new business and marketing, equally as such, I found the same problem between new business and customer success. So what you've just indicated there would suggest that customer success is doing their job as it was intended before all of the split outs of predictable revenue 2011, but that hasn't been my experience in any of the industries that I've worked in, that I work with, or that I've been head of sales for. What I found was that customer success are now the more junior people than the SDR people, and the people that manage those people have never had a sales job in their life. So 2 things happen from that. Obviously, I was going to say a cluster swear word, but I won't say that. Is what I found is that a massive causation there is they're not go-getters, they're only order takers. So what that does is when new business does a handover for a communications plan with assigned agreeables, they don't action it. Customer leaves. The other component of that means that they only process left to right what they know day to day. That means on the way side of that is they're not chasing the existing lapse contracts. They don't work on the renewals, and they don't have any outbound actions for opportunity spot. That's the reason that I made Disruptur also encapsulate that if you want us to do that for you. And what that would look like is us placing those calls, but we can also do that from a cleanse perspective. So lapsed clients will be doing where are you now calls, what could we have done better, and what would need to happen to make that happen. So that's a massive thing that I noticed that all of the companies that I've worked at previously or I've worked with had a massive leaky bucket right there. So that's why I wanted to make sure it was completely full cycle. And give companies the option of showing that we can do that even as a pilot cleanse to show how we can get some of that business back for you because they're not doing those actions, through having more junior people in those roles, and also having like a national operations director that's never had an urgency sales role in their life, so they don't know how to coach those people on how to do it. That's what I found.
Very
Sorry
interesting.
if that's pretty attacking, but I just call it as I see it. And that was one of the biggest things that I found at both ends, was the misalignment and misunderstanding between new business and marketing. New business thinks that marketing is a sales assistant. No, marketing's here to show what to do with the data, where to do, what to send, what to create to make that happen so sales can win. But equally, from sales to customer success, there's a massive ambiguity of what those job functions are, because we've got 2 junior people in those roles, and it's a massive problem. So that's why we solve that. If they elect. So I've got pilots on my website where people can just ask just for that, just to prove proof of concept as a mini thing, but we also do that as part of the full cycle service.
Very interesting. Well, thanks for sharing. Should we move into the third topic, since I know we only have 20 minutes left? Channels and validating channels on LinkedIn. This was something you submitted. And so just curious, could you talk us through this?
Yeah. So I think I meant multiple places where that can exist. So obviously,
Gotcha.
so people would know they need to obviously validate with if emails are going to bounce, if you can do that. But I see what's going to happen with all the ChatGPT is eventually there's going to be detection softwares, so that people can't do bulk emails for much longer. That's my perspective on that. So it won't really matter. So you'll have to reach them in other ways. So that would also mean some type of validations between what you could find on LinkedIn to find out if they're in market, what they talk about, that type of information. But the other big component of that, obviously being a traditional cold caller coming from head of sales, is you would need to find out if they're one of the two buckets, if they answer the phone and if they don't. And then those are the people that we can ask for permission to see landing pages which have the content that should show them how to get to the dream state. So that's probably the easiest way I can explain with that. If that's probably too quick to explain, but maybe I'm keeping you on time here.
No, it's fine. It makes sense. And we agree, that's something that we can talk about a lot, is that, email marketing is getting harder and harder. Cold emails are just not getting through to people anymore. And there's so many different ways, whether it's being blocked for spam or whether it's being filtered because they're using some email filtering, or whether they just don't, most people have multiple emails. So they have an email that they use for their work and they have an email that they use for everything else that gets, thrown into spam, and they really don't read anything in there. So it really gets difficult to reach those people, and people don't trust email anymore. And they're certainly not most people won't click on a link if in an email that's from someone that they don't know. And so that's always the challenge is getting somebody not just to open that email, but are they actually going to engage with that email? So agree 100%. Need to find other ways to engage with people. LinkedIn has obviously been a pretty powerful one for a lot of people. That's we talk to a lot of our clients about that as well.
So just one more thing on that, if I may, to extend on what you said. So what I see is that technology is not going to go backwards. So where all of those conversations can be held, that's where they will be held. So we will not be tied to, okay, well, I have to do this because it's from email, or I can only do this by a cold call. Asking for permission to speak to people will be in multiple places as we continue to grow this digital landscape. That's what I see. Like if you'd asked your team 5 years ago, would it have been appropriate to DM someone on Twitter and ask for a business conversation, or even talk to them to get to that point where they're asking you? People would have laughed. If you'd said on Facebook Messenger for a B2B conversation 10 years ago, people would have fell off their chair. Now, if you can't reach people, you find where they're active so that you can have that conversation where they want to have it. It's not tied to traditional channels anymore.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, now you're seeing that extend to, Slack and even WhatsApp, right?
Yeah.
I was actually blown away by someone that wanted to get in contact with me that found out the Slack channels that I was in and just DM'd me there with a meeting request. And I was actually pretty impressed. So I took the meeting. So
yeah,
I know that that's prevalent now, but when it happened, I was like, oh, okay, that's pretty impressive. So yeah.
Yes, I'm a big fan of that as well. And you mentioned WhatsApp, and in the US, WhatsApp isn't as big as it is in other countries. But I'm in the US and I've joined a few communities on there, and the same thing with Slack. There's just a lot of business that happens in there. But I think David Wellborn was being sort of silly when he was saying, so marketing is data driven, and we had that up earlier. Just so I thought we would address that. But yes, David, of course, marketing is data driven. But anything else on this topic that we want to get into? I think originally these were two separate ones. So channels, data and channels, and then validating channels on LinkedIn. So anything on either of those topics you want to cover before we move on?
I was going to say, we talked a little bit about what we just were talking about. Like we're talking about new channels, right? Slack, WhatsApp. You being sort of like, we'll call the expert in identifying channels to reach people, where they are, where they're active. Where do you see the future is on that? What are the new channels going to be? You have any feelings for that going forward?
So funnily enough, I actually think it'll go slightly the other way. I think that there'll be so much integration on LinkedIn that everyone will be contactable 24/7 for cold video calls. That's what I think. With the integration of how far they're going to take Sales Navigator with Dynamics, they'll take that further to give people the option if they want to answer a cold video call or not. I wrote a paper about this like 3 years ago on LinkedIn, and people thought that I was like crazy, but I can't see how that won't happen. So you'll be able to have full ungated access to multiple people, but it'll be up to them if they want to answer that call, is what I see. But for what you're angling at there in terms of communities and different types of where those groups exist, anywhere and everywhere where people congregate or make content, they'll also give the same access. So sometimes people are not obviously available on LinkedIn, or you can't get them on Facebook Messenger, or they might be on WhatsApp, but they might be on Telegram, or they might be on Getter.
Telegram. See, that's what we don't hear a lot of that here. I don't. Is that even in the US?
Yeah, Telegram, Signal.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's other places where that is massive all around the world, where people are already seeing that that's where they congregate in groups, and you don't have to be a member of those groups to message those people. So, but you need the time and the ability to know what you're looking for. But there'll be more and more of those accesses, is what I see.
I thought you were literally talking about a Telegram. I was like, oh, we're going
really way back there.
Yeah.
Morse code.
Yeah. To me, one of the biggest problems with channels is, as new channels come out, there tends to be a permeation of solicitation. But for example, we had email, and if they don't get you to respond in email, they're coming out to LinkedIn. And like an example of this was, I got, a message on LinkedIn, and they were talking about, hey, we see that your company's in the food and beverage industry. And I'm like, what? No, they're not. Did you even take this, as Tom Slocum would say, like, show me, you know me. So if you're going to outreach,
I think that's Sam McKenna.
Well, that's what he would say, is Sam McKenna. And so I know, like, if I was trying to get people to respond to me, I had more luck sending them like a 60-second video off of Vidyard, because they're more likely to open up that rather than like sending emails. And so I think that's like, there's so many emails and so many people trying to reach us just on things that are not relevant to us, that, it makes us hesitant to even like open the stuff that would be relevant.
Yeah. So funnily enough, with what you said at the start there, I actually think you're right with some of the stuff to go backwards to go forwards. So what I think will happen is, if we look at all of these places where these people can or could be reached, there'll be some people that will look to do things that used to work in back in the day. So co-branded boxes with like deals as options, like, i.e., this is a proposal that's done on craft paper inside of a co-branded printed box via post. I guarantee people will start doing that this year, because no one does it. So if you receive that, you'd be like, well, there's a lot of effort here. I'll at least read it. And then if you read it and it hits the mark, you're like, well, hang on, I probably need to contact those people. So there'll be some people that are onto it within what works and what should work and what's not being exploited to the point of ridiculousness. And people that can tweak all of those channels will be very, very successful.
We just had that conversation in one of our internal meetings. I think it was today, just about the shift back to regular, direct mail.
Yeah.
Because it is getting more difficult in some of the online channels to reach people, right? Via email or whatever. So I think there is an interesting shift that may happen there, back to more direct mail.
We're all going to become pen pals again.
But I'm still kind of floored by your comment about the video call, because I'm trying to figure out like if someone tried to invoke a video call to me and I did not know who they were, what are the chances of me actually responding to that? I mean, I guess it depends on the platform. It'd be interesting, actually, I think, for LinkedIn to have video call capabilities.
They do. They have it. I video call people
on LinkedIn.
Yes, on the DM.
I
but I mean,
never even
But the
noticed it.
audio
Yeah.
is better. Just send people a little audio message like, hey,
Mhm.
da, 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 and then it just goes a little,
Mm.
yeah.
Hmm.
Now you
I've never
know.
done that. I didn't even
But-
know that was a thing.
David, did you know that you could actually cold video call drop people on Teams meetings?
On what? Say that again.
On Teams, on Microsoft Teams, you could
Oh.
cold
Oh, I
cold
hate
video
that.
call
I've
people.
Yeah,
gotten
I've had that
before.
happen to me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I'm not
didn't
saying to
accept
do
it.
it, but I'm just saying it was possible.
Yeah.
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 And interesting. Advertisers have to get more and more creative these days, and they need to have really great data. But speaking of all that, we ask all of our guests about their tech stacks. What are some of your favorite tools? And go slow because I'm going to try to tag them in the comments. And tools that you might think that B2C marketers primarily, or data experts might find helpful.
Well, I don't want to be overly disappointing because
Okay.
I'm a big advocate of going backwards to go forwards. Because I have a massive lean on a team that does that, I've literally cancelled all of my stacks. So because if I only need to know to show them what to look for, I can make them a chart and say, when to know these factors, can you search me for this and tell me what comes back? And then I'll tell them how to do it. So in terms of stack, and I don't want to cut your segment short, I don't even have a stack anymore. And that's the complete honest truth. You can check.
Well,
But,
I don't know if that's true because you have StreamYard or something. You're running a podcast.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. So,
Yeah.
okay. I thought you meant in terms of the data scrapes to build the educational content to figure out the bottom titles to find the
Yeah.
multiples.
I mean, ideally, if you knew any of those that you might suggest. But
Even just your day-to-day life.
yeah.
So.
Okay. So, yeah, you guys would know for every part of my content, obviously edit all that stuff myself and then put that out as quick as possible. But you guys would know you can do that in two heartbeats. So I use v.io for that. For my podcast, I run everything through Anchor and then upload that through RSS to Apple. But yeah, everything else is just kind of, pretty low.
v.io?
Yeah.
Like the letter V and then a dot.
V-E-E-D.io.
Oh, okay. Veed. Okay, got it.
Yep.
And what was the other one? Was there another one?
His whiteboard.
Whiteboard.
Yeah.
It's a big part of your tech stack, right?
Yeah, the expo markers and the whiteboard.
Yeah. Yep.
Very
So I probably use like Miro a little bit for those flowcharts to show the data team what they need to look for. And then if they find that, look for this and then that type of thing. But yeah, in terms of like massive tech stack, I know that I spoke a lot about that talking to Justin Michael's body of work previously. But now, because I've got it down pat with my team and telling them what to look for, I don't waste my time with all of those things anymore. I just say, this is what you need to look for. This is where you should find it. Do this. And then, my personal stack, I just obviously use computer and those three things. That's basically it. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Very
yeah,
cool.
Miro's an interesting one. I haven't used that one before, but I have heard it mentioned before.
How do you spell it? I was trying to find it.
M-I-R-O.
M-I-R-O. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Whimsical would do the same thing, but I found it more complicated for the ones that are like very branched. So I found Miro easier.
Yeah.
Okay. Not Mirror Group, right?
Oh, I can send it to you.
No.
Yeah. That's all right.
Yeah, it's not popping up for me.
It's a collaborative tool.
Oh, interesting. Maybe they don't have a LinkedIn page.
Yeah, it's MIRO. And they call themselves Visual Collaboration Software.
Interesting. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that with us.
All right.
Cool.
Sorry to disappoint your segment on text.
No, not at all.
Actually, that's a good one because I know someone has mentioned that before. I think that the interesting thing about talking about tech stacks is that sometimes you learn new things, sometimes you hear the same things, but even when you hear that, I think especially for our listeners, it's like, oh wait, I heard that someone mentioned that before. It just gives someone kind of a reminder, like even for me, like I'm going to go look it up again because I know that it's been mentioned before, and it's not something that I ever really considered using, but the more people I hear use it, the more I think, well, maybe I should be using it, so I got to check it out.
Yeah. So sorry, one correction. When I do get the data back from those teams, I do get them to also run that through Cumantic.ai to do profiling. But that's really the only one that I'm using right now.
Very cool. And I think it sends a good message that you don't need a huge tech stack, right?
Mhm.
You need the tools that you need.
Yeah. Well, if they're companies looking to do more with less this year, they should be looking to go backwards to go forwards with only what they need, in my opinion.
You can say that again.
Yep, that's a good way to wrap this session up.
Absolutely. All right. Well, in closing, where can people find you?
Obviously on LinkedIn. And then my podcast is Better Business Building by Adem Manderovic on Spotify. It's also on Apple as well. That's basically it. I am on TikTok, but it's only very, very small. Thank you for all your support on there, Jesse, yourself. But mostly on LinkedIn is where you'll find me.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
No worries. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Adam. This has been great. Appreciate you coming and joining us on the show.
And Josh, great to see you again as well, too. Sorry there. Didn't mean to cover your head. But yeah, keep us posted of when you can stop by again. It was great to hear from you, Josh. So, all right, everybody. Well, thank you for another really great Deconstructing Data podcast. Hopefully we've interested you in one way or another to want to learn about your customer data, even though we didn't get into that. So you can, of course, check out the QR code here. Oh, I better take this down.
There you go.
For our audio-only listeners, you can visit BDEX.com and click the try free button and try OmniIQ, upload a CSV file of your customers, and you get free data on it. So you don't even need a credit card to create an account. So you can see the gender, birth year, as well as household income analytics on your first party data. What else might you add about OmniIQ, David?
That's the easiest way to get started is just uploading a sample of your customer files into the data clean room, and you'll get back some analytics. And from there, you can purchase additional data about your customers and use that to enrich your existing customer files, or take it a step further and try to find more people just like your best customers using our machine learning platform, OmniIQ ML. That will enable you to build an extended audience of more people that look just like your best customers. And that's what we do.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a great episode. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And until next time, I'll go ahead and close it out.